Yeah. Okay. Morning. You ready? Okay. I want to talk about it's now Adar. I want to talk about the mitzvah of MEGILLAS Amalek. Bisman Azed Dafka, in that context. Now, I want to start like this. In 1942, the Allied forces under the General Dwight Eisenhower launched something called Operation Torch, where they conquered Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco from the Vichy, the Nazi-aligned Vichy regime, and brought it back to Allied control. Now, once they did that, it was presumed by the Jews who lived in Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco that would lead to a big Hatzalah for them. They would no longer be subjected to the Nazis' persecutions or the Vichy-allied Nazis' persecutions. And they celebrated, they made a big simcha of themselves. It was around Purim time. Ad Kedei Kach that we don't know who wrote it, but there's a few copies of it left over in the world. It's a collector's item now. They wrote something called the MEGILLAS HITLER. Now, it was a little premature because it was in 1942, and it really wasn't the right time for MEGILLAS Hitler quite yet. But in 1942, they wrote something called the MEGILLAS Hitler, and many people in those kahillas glued a MEGILLAS Hitler to the MEGILLAS Esther, like following the MEGILLAS Esther. And when they finished reading MEGILLAS Esther, they went straight into reading MEGILLAS Hitler. And it was very similar in a certain sense. Like it ended with the Aseres B'nai Haman, not Haman, but Hitler was Haman, and then Himmler and Mussolini, and there's like a whole list. I have a picture of it, a whole list of all the Aseres B'nai Haman according to that calculation. And they read this. Now, it's mostly gone. I think Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim has one copy of it. Via Mol, it comes up on auction for a few $1,000s, the MEGILLAS Hitler. It's a rare book that barely exists, and it was premature in its time, but it exposes a certain concept that I'm trying to highlight over here, is that when Jews were faced with an adversary, someone who hated them, someone who wanted to kill them on a high level, Jews always run to the Amalek Haman comparison. Meaning, Tsar Alexander was called Haman, and his ministers were called Aseres B'nai Haman, and there was a minister who was called Pashandasa, and a minister was called Vaizasa. And this is you could look through the literature from the time, and you'll see this. And Jews always did it. The chiddush to me is that sometimes the Goyim called themselves this. In 1944, on the 11th anniversary of the what was it called? What was Hitler's official party called? The Nazi party had a name, the Democratic Socialist Party or something. Democratic Socialists, I think they were called. National Democratic Socialists? Something like that is what the Nazi Party was. On the 11th anniversary of their rise to power in 1944, which is close to the end of the war, Hitler gave a drasha. This was printed in the New York Times. I looked it up last night. There's archives. You could see it. The New York Times printed his drasha. In 1944, Hitler gave this drasha, celebrating his party's rise to power and his ideology and etc. And he ends off and he says, the stakes are so high, we can't afford to lose. If we lose this battle and we don't end up, making the world Judenrein and getting rid of all the Jews, they're going to say about me that I was just another Haman who was defeated by the Mordechai, and they'll make a day to celebrate my defeat, our defeat. This is what Hitler said in a drasha in 1944. So the comparison of calling an adversary of the Jews, an adversary who seeks their destruction, Amalek and Haman, was something that was so deep in the bones. Hitler himself.
He knew about MEGILLAS Hitler.
Yeah, he didn't know about MEGILLAS Esther. He didn't know about MEGILLAS Hitler, but he knew about MEGILLAS Esther, and he considered this parallel to be so stark that he himself mentioned it in a speech in 1944. So now, that's all good and well in regards to like how things are perceived in the world. That when you're looking for a term to express how someone hates us or someone deserves to be destroyed, or Hatzalah the Klal Yisrael has, so you go right away to the best mashal available, and the mashal is the mashal of MEGILLAS Esther, because it's very expressive of exactly what Klal Yisrael is undergoing many, many times. But are they actually Amalek? Is Hitler actually Amalek? Are the Germans actually Amalek? Is anybody specifically Amalek? Is the mitzvah of MEGILLAS Amalek the way it was still exist? Could it still exist? Is it gone? Is there a nation that's called Amalek? Meaning, in reality, are these things true, or are these just a mashal that's used when you want to describe like how bad someone is? You run to the mashal that's available and you go there. So I want to wind back the clock a little bit. There's many, many different Messiahs that have been said throughout the years about who exactly is Amalek, Bisman Hazeh. Some of them are fascinating. The Germans, of course, get pride of placement. That is for two reasons. First of all, recency bias. They're the most egregious recent adversary of Klal Yisrael, but also because they took it to another level. But I want to just go through some of the various different ones. but I want to get to it. Let's wind back the clock to the beginning, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it in the right, in its place. Now, whether or not there's a mitzvah to kill Amalek b'zman hazeh or not, okay, let's start like this. We'll get to the story soon. There's stories. Let's start like this. A long time ago, Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar. I won't belabor the part that's very common. Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar. They had just left Mitzrayim. They just received the Torah. Klal Yisrael had been chosen as the Am HaNivchar. Amalek launches a surprise attack, a brutal surprise attack that really hurts Klal Yisrael. Ad Kedei Kach to the point, and Klal Yisrael engages in a battle. That's the end of Parshas B'Shalach, and Kasher Gavar, Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael, and they win some sort of titular victory over Amalek, though far from annihilating Amalek, because the pasuk continues and says, although you live to fight another day, Muhammad Hashem midardar. Hashem says, Macha Emcha Zecher Amalek, I'm going to destroy the Zecher of Amalek. Muhammad Hashem Amalek midardar. It's a Muhammad that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to wage, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bears this grudge against Amalek, for forever and ever until the end of time. Now, this is reiterated for Klal Yisrael later on in Devarim, in the end of Parashat Kisisa, where it's reiterated again for Klal Yisrael that Klal Yisrael should always remember that what Amalek did to them, remember to hate them, and remember to destroy them. This is what's reiterated in the Psukim. So now this is two different types of things that are reiterated in the Psukim. One's telling that Hashem hates Amalek and will maintain this battle forever. Hashem bears this grudge and will maintain this battle forever. And one is saying that Klal Yisrael is obligated to bear this hate, to remember this hate, and to carry this battle forward for generations. Now, the Psukim later on in the Nevi'im talk about when Klal Yisrael actually had the opportunity to engage in these battles. Now, I just want to read for a second the Rambam. The Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Malachim, it's a famous Rambam. The Rambam says like this. The Rambam says, Shloisha mitzvahs nitstavu Yisrael b'shas knisas la'aretz. 3 mitzvahs Klal Yisrael was commanded to do when they entered Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvah number 1 was limnos lehem melech, shenemar seim tasam alach melech. Klal Yisrael was told to appoint a king. Ulahachre zarei shel Amalek, to destroy the remnants, whatever remains of Amalek. Shenemar timcha zecher Amalek, you should destroy the zecher of Amalek. V'livnos beis habechira. Shenemar l'shachn l'sidushu b'as hashama. Now these are not mutually exclusive, because Klal Yisrael was never matzliach in destroying the Zecher of Amalek completely, and still they were able to continue on to build the Beis HaMikdash. So these are the mitzvahs that were given to Klal Yisrael, Shas Knisas La'aretz. Now, when Klal Yisrael came to Eretz Yisrael, so they made attempts to be Mekayim this mitzvah. The Psukim in Shmuel Aleph and later on tell us that Shaul HaMelech was instructed by Shmuel to go destroy Amalek. It's in Perek Tesvav in Shmuel Aleph, and I'll read you a few of the Psukim. The Psukim say like this: Vayemer Shmuel al Shaul, Oisi shalach Hashem l'mashchacha l'melech. Hashem sent me to appoint you as a king, Alamai, al Yisrael, va'ata shma l'kol devei Hashem. Now listen to what Hashem says. Koyamar Hashem tzvakes, pakadati es asher asa Amalek l'Yisrael. It's time. I'm ready for you to go and destroy Amalek for what they did to Klal Yisrael. Asher samle b'derech ba'alosim Mitzrayim, for the trap that Amalek set for Klal Yisrael when they were leaving Mitzrayim. Ata lech v'kisas Amalek v'achramtem es kol asher loy. Go destroy Amalek. Now here in this pasuk is some instructive details that we negate our conversation. It says Ata lech v'kisas Amalek. Go hit Amalek. V'achramtem es kol asher loy. Destroy everything that they have. V'loy sachma l'lav. Don't take any pity on them. V'himasta me'ish adisha, kill man, woman, me'oilul v'ad yonik, baby, child, mishar v'ad seh, migamel v'ad chamar. All their cattle, all their animal, everything, kill everything. Don't take any rachmanis. Now it says Shaul went and he wasn't able to follow through on this. He listened to what the Am was telling him, and he left over some of the cattle, and he left over a few exceptions. And even though eventually Shaul makes an attempt at cleaning up his mess and killing whatever he left over, it's too late, and Amalek lives to fight another day. Amalek, survives and lives to fight another day. Several years later, David HaMelech sends his king Yoav to go lead like rooting out a battle, to go root out all the remnants of Amalek and kill them. And the Psukim tell us that Yoav also was not successful. To the point, and this would sound funny to us, the Gemara in Baba Basra and Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph brings a whole discussion about Rebbeim who are not good at their jobs, about what the style of a Rebbe should be, how a Rebbe should be. Should he be teaching a lot? Should he be teaching very carefully? And the Gemara brings a story with Yoav. It says when Yoav went to fight with Amalek, it says he wasn't successful. He left over much of Amalek. So it says, Kiyasa Kamel David, when he came in front of David HaMelech, his boss, the king, David says, My time Avdasachi, why didn't you eradicate everybody? Amalek told him, D'chsev Timcha as Zachar Amalek. Yoav says, the pasuk says, I should kill all the Zacharim, all the men of Amalek. Amalek told him, V'hanan Zecher Karinan. We read it with a different Nakuda. David HaMelech said, you read it with the wrong Nakudas. We read Zecher Amalek, kill out all the remembrance of Amalek. He says, Amalek, no Zachar Akron. I was taught Zachar. Also Shailu the Rabbi, Yoav goes and asks his grade school Rebbe. Yoav, who's a general, a fierce war leader in Klal Yisrael, now goes to ask his Rebbe, his grade school Rebbe. He says, Amalei, hey Acherson, how did you teach it to me? Amalei Zecher. So Shachos Hafsir Lemikle, Yoav pulls out his sword. He says, I'm going to kill you. You taught me the wrong thing, and then now look, this was detrimental to my life. This was terrible. So the Rebbe tells him, Amalek, he says, let me just be ba'arer. You're right, I messed up. Let me just be ba'arer. Don't kill me. And Yoav says, no. It's also an error for someone to not do the right thing. And the Gemara brings two nuschayos. Either Yoav actually killed him or Yoav lets him go. But Yoav, at that point, was so dismayed by his inability to complete this mitzvah that he was ready to kill his Privanei Rebbe. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are ready to kill the Privanei Rebbe, but Yoav actually went and maybe did kill his Privanei Rebbe. He was so dismayed by this missed opportunity. Now, obviously, we know in the Purim story, the Gemara in Megillah tells us, Daf Yud Beis, that this is just a continuation. Yarib and Shemi ben Kish is making reference, the Gemara tells us, to all the previous attempts at destroying Amalek, who was involved in them, who wasn't involved in them. So Amalek lives to fight another day, it survives. Amalek survives all the attempts that Klal Yisrael makes to kill them completely, and survives to fight another day. So now, what happens to Amalek after that? That's about 1,000 years that we covered of Amalek, being attempted to be destroyed by Klal Yisrael. So what happens to Amalek after that? So now the Gemara in Brachas on Daf Chav Ches tells us something, and as I always get passing into the Mishnah, but the Gemara in Brachas on Chav Ches is telling us the story of Rav Gamliel and Rav Yeshua. One of the greatest fights that ever happened in Klal Yisrael, in the leadership of Klal Yisrael, was the fight between Rav Gamliel and Rav Yeshua. Rav Gamliel was the Nasi, Rav Yeshua was the Ab Bezdin, and they didn't see eye to eye on several psakim. And Rav Gamliel, feeling that it was the time after the Churban, where the Nasi had to be a strong position, made it his business to uproot any machlekes that Rav Yeshua was having against him and really dig it out. And eventually the Chachamim, the peers of Rav Gamliel and Rav Yeshua, felt that Rav Gamliel had overdone it, and they removed Rav Gamliel from his job. It's a long Gemara in Brachas, I'm not going to go into it now. They removed him from his job, and it was a question, who should take over? Rav Elazar ben Azariah, Rav Akiva, Rav Yeshua, until finally they figure out some sort of power sharing cycle. Eventually Rav Gamliel is allowed back in, and etc. Now, when Rav Gamliel is no longer in charge of the Beis Medrash, so there's a tremendous, the doors get blown open. Rav Gamliel had been like a bris gazah. Rav Gamliel only let in very few handful of people, and the new mahalach that these others felt was to let everybody in, to open the doors wider, and in one day it turned from brisk into Mir Yisrael or something, and it doubled by thousands. The Gemara gives us great descriptions of how many more people came, and the Gemara says that because there were so many more Talmidim and Chacham who were allowed in, a tremendous amount of psakim were formed on that day, and all of Mishnayos Idias that comes from that day, all different sveikis that were resolved on that day were from this, blowing open the doors of the Beis Medrash. Now the Gemara also over there tells us a story. It says, Boy Bayoim. One second. He says, Boy Bayoim. On that day, one of the shilas that they discussed was as follows: Boy Bayoim, Boy Yehuda Ger Amayni Lefneim, the Beis Medrash. Yehuda, who was a Ger Amayni, came from Amain, which we're not allowed to accept game from, came into the Beis Medrash, and he says, Amalahem, Ma'ani Lavi B'Kahal. Can I marry a Jewish girl? Am I allowed to marry a Jewish girl? Amalei Rav Gamliel, Asrat Rav Gamliel jumps right in and says, no, you're not allowed. Asrat Lavi B'Kahal. Amalei Rav Yeshua says, Mutarat Lavi B'Kahal. You're allowed to. Amalei Rav Gamliel V'Alei Kvar Nemar Le'Yaveh Amayni B'Kahal Hashem. Rav Gamliel says in the first pasuk. The pasuk says, and Amayni Me'avi is not allowed to come B'Kahal Hashem. Are they sitting in their places? Are Ammon and Moav still based out of where you think they are? Sancheiriv, years earlier, already came and was mevalbel all the umas. He already dispersed all the umas to all different corners of the world. Fine. So v'chol the parish, meruba parish, and therefore anybody who presents themselves, even if they come from Ammon, you don't have to assume they're Ammon. Meruba parish, they come from most of the Goyim in the world. Most of the Goyim in the world are not Ammon. This is what Yeshua said, and that is in the Mishnah in Yedayim in Parak Dalet. It's paskin like that anybody who comes and presents, he wants to be a ger, we could accept him now because we don't assume him to be from Ammon. Now let's take that to Amalek. Okay, so now Amalek, very similarly, Amalek was a nation at some point. Amalek lived in a certain locale at a certain point, and Amalek was battled and destroyed. Now, whether or not Amalek survived in a real tzibur to fight another day, even if they did, L'chayra Sancheiriv came at some point and was mevalbel Amalek just like he was mevalbel everybody else. So the whole nation of Amalek seemingly should be something that's totally dispersed, something that's gone, something that's impossible to put your finger on anymore. Now, this idea that once a nation is dispersed, the dinim that apply to them are bottled, even in regards to killing them, is really Mefurish Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, in Hilchos Malachim, in Parak Hay, says as follows: there's a din that Klal Yisrael has to destroy the Shiva Amimim. Right? We have to destroy all the 7 Amimim who are occupying Eretz Yisrael when we got there. The Rambam says this din to destroy the Shiva Amim, says the Rambam, is not Negeya anymore, because Kfar Avdu Shmam Min Ha'ilam. They've already been totally dispersed. Their name is gone from the world. The Sheva Amim as a nation has been destroyed. Avdu Shmam Min Ha'olam. It's been gone. I'll read it around. The Rambam says, I don't know if I have it here. Avdu Shmam Min Ha'olam. Oh, he said no, here. It's Halacha Daled. Parakei Halacha Daled. It says, Mitzvah Saseh Lahachrim Shivas Amim. Shenemar Hachrim Tachrim. You should destroy them. Chol Shabal Liyadei Echad Me'em V'lei Hargoi. Over B'lei Saseh. Anybody who one of them presents themselves to you and you don't kill them, you over B'lei Saseh. Shenemar Le'sechai Kol Neshama. But, says the Rambam V'kvar, Avad Zichram. They're gone. They're lost. Like the Mishnah Yudayim, like the Gemara in Brachis, like Rav Akiva and the Mechilta, like Shitas all over Shas, they're lost, they're gone. Paravad Zichrum, it's not applicable anymore. Now listen to this strange Rambam then. The Rambam in Halacha Hey continues as follows. He says like this: V'chein mitzvah hasei la'abed zecher Amalek. It's also a mitzvah to destroy the zecher of Amalek. Shenemar timcha zecher Amalek. Mitzvah hasei lisker tamid ma'asav. You have to always remember that ma'asav aram v'arivasei k'dei la'or revasei, to inspire the hate inside yourself. Shenemar zachar s'shasel Amalek v'piyah shmuel lamdu zachar b'pelei sishkach b'leiv she'asel shgoich revasei v'senasei. Now, you'll notice a very interesting thing. The Rambam says nothing about Kvaravad Zichram. The Rambam says mitzvah saseh lahachrim in the present tense. It's a mitzvah saseh to destroy them. He says nothing about Kvaravad Zichram. What happened to the regular halacha of Bas Ancher of Bilbul Kala Umim? That you see the Rambam Paskins like literally a halacha before this. I mean, why is this din of Timcha Zecher Amalek still applicable in its full sense? Now, before I go into some terutzim of the Rambam, I want to just share a story or two. Assuming that the Rambam is saying it in present tense, that there's a mitzvah to destroy Amalek today, there's a famous thing that's gesagt like this. The Stipler brings it down in Rachas Rabbeinu, but it's brought down in many other sources. The Stipler told his people that Rav Chaim Volozhiner said that he had a Messiah from the Goyim, that he's able to look at a person's face and see who's an Amaleki. He'd be able to look at them, and the Goyim gave him some sort of telltale sign. He could look at someone and see he's Amaleki. But the Stipler said that, at least the other Messiahs say that Rav Chaim Volozhiner refused to tell this over to anybody else. Said because putting this into the hands of just people who are going to be traveling around and going to be, ascertaining who's an Amaleki and running around and killing people could be very dangerous, and the Chaim Volozhiner refused to give this over. Now the Stipler said this over. He said I don't know if the Goyin gave over a Messiah had to know because of the physical characteristics. You could look at the face and you could be able to tell who it is, or he told them over what type of hashkafas a person has to have to know that he's a Amaleki. Meaning you have to sit down and have an in-depth conversation with this guy, and then you'll be able to ascertain that he's an Amaleki or not an Amaleki. So this is a thing. Now, when the Stipler was telling this over to his Talmidim, the people in the room said that Mizak Dibber, he said that the Chasam Sofer killed an Amaleki once. It's said that the Chasam Sofer killed an Amaleki. So he told the Stipler, and the Stipler says, Stam, it's a story. This is what the Stipler said. The Stipler machtavek the story, he said, Stam, it's a story, it's not a thing. Now, what is this that's being referred to that they say that the Chasam Sofer killed an Amaleki? So really, the Stipler is absolutely correct. Stam, it's a story. Because the sources are taka a mess, and there's no real good way to know who, what, when, where. But there is a story that's told over the Stipler. All the themes come to a certain point. The Chasam Sofer, when he was 16 years old, was estranged from his father, estranged from his parents. He was not really living at home anymore. He was learning by his Rebbe of Nassan Adler, who had been kicked out. Nassan Adler was a Makubal who had been kicked out of Frankfurt because he was doing weird, strange things, and it was in the shadow still of Shapsayis, and there was a tremendous zahirus to anybody who was doing strange Kabbalistic things. Nassan Adler had been kicked out, so the Chasam Sofer was like a little bit of on the move. The Chasam Sofer was estranged from his parents. His Rebbe was estranged from the Kehila, and the Chasam Sofer was on the move. Now, at 16 years old, he finished Shas for the first time, the Stipler, the Chazon Ish. I don't know why I keep saying Stipler. The Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer of Frankfurt, the Main, finished Shas for the first time at 16 years old, and he went to ask his Rebbe, the Rav Nassan Adler, what should he do to mark this occasion? Rav Nassan Adler told him he should fast for 3 days and then make a siyum. So the Chasam Sofer was in the middle of a 3-day fast. He was shvach already, and he was traveling on the road, him and some of his chaverim, some of his chavrusas, and they were attacked or set upon by a group of young goyim on the street. And here's where the versions diverge. Some say, I'll tell you all the versions because they're interesting, but some say that the Chasam Sofer looked and he said, that one's an Amaleki, and he picked up his fist and he gave him one big good clap to the head, and the guy dropped dead like this on the floor. That's the simplest, straightforward version that makes it, mamish cut and dry. Amalekim, there's a din to kill them if you can find them, and there is some sort of way to know. If you know, find them, kill them. That's the simplest version. Other versions say that the Chasam Sofer took off running. Him and his friends took off running, and eventually his friends peeled off. I think there's a joke they say if you're hiking in the forest and I don't forget how it goes exactly, and a bear attacks you, you just have to outrun your friend. You don't have to outrun the bear. right? So the Chassam Sofer was left behind by his friends, and they were, now on him. And the Chassam Sofer reached over to a tree, he grabbed a piece of a branch, and he turned around and swung it, and he hit one of them, and the story in the Mechut Mishlosh, the original version, is just he knocked them out. Like he stopped their attack. Other versions is that the kid died. A third version is still that he didn't hit anybody. He ran until he got to the edge of the town, and someone let him into their house and hit him, and the Goyim ran away. Either way, there was clearly a time that the Chassam Sofer was attacked by Goyim when he was walking on the road and had to either defend himself or run away, or in some sense or another. Now, the most exciting version of it is that the Chassam Sofer took a piece of wood off a tree, and he hit the guy who was chasing him, who fell dead on the floor, and the Chassam Sofer said, "Here lies dead in Amaleki." And he took this stick home with him, and eventually when he got his first stellar as a Rav, the minig in those days was when a guy became a Rav, the gift they would give him was like a zilben shtekin. Rebbe still today, when they become a Rebbe, it doesn't matter how old they are, meaning even if they become a Rebbe at a young age, and some chassidus, and not everyone, get a zilben shtekin, meaning a Rebbe walks around with a stick. It's like a covered thing. So back in the day, it was normal, even in any town, if you became a Rav, they would give you like a shtek. And Chassam Sofer, when they were ready to give him a shtek, and asked if they could carve this piece of wood into his Rabbanish shtekin, and on the handle, supposedly it was written, Bezeha, whatever, Bezeha shtekin, I was Zeichet Nisim, in Yiddish. I saw it written down somewhere how it was written. Now, again, nobody has the shtekin. If they did, it would be a real antique. It would have been by the Skar Achnas Sefer Torah 2 weeks ago, if they would have had this shtekin if it would exist. But this is the story. These are the stories, the versions of it that are told. Now, why are these versions are not so important are not integral to our storyline? But what they try to ascribe to is that the Chassam Sofer was part of this Messiah, that if there is an Amaleki somewhere, then you have to have a chiyuv to kill him, you're supposed to kill him, and it's known who the Amalekim are adayim is. Now, the Rambam, Kipshutei, seems to be saying that if you know. So now, we have a shtickle steerus the Rambam. In one place, the Rambam seems to say about Zayin Am and Karavad Zichram, and over here, the Rambam seems to say it exists. So what's going on? So now, it happens to be, it was Rebberal Soloveitchik's yahrzeit yesterday, so it's good to talk about this. There's a machlekes between Rebberal Soloveitchik and Rebberal, i.e. J.B. Soloveitchik from Boston, about a memra gesagt in the name of Rav Chaim. Maybe some people have heard it. There's a memra that's gesagt there. It's brought down a different svarim that Rav Chaim Soloveitchik used to say that the yishuv to this Rambam was as follows. He would say like this: the reason why the Rambam doesn't say about Amalek for Avad Zichram is Rav Chaim used to say that Amalek is an idea. Amalek is a certain level of sinna, a certain level of pashit, unnatural, unbridled sin for Klal Yisrael that a guy could have, and it isn't a specific nation anymore. Meaning maybe the nation of Amalek was taken as Svalvo, but there was a time when the Romans were Amalek, and there was a time when the Armenians were Amalek, and there was a time when the Germans were Amalek. And meaning Amalek is an idea. Amalek is not a tried and true, set in stone, a certain nation. Amalek could be, anyone who presents as Amalek, anyone who behaves as Amalek throughout the generations. This is a member that Rabbi Soloveitchik said over in the name of his father, B'Shem Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, in the name of Rav Chaim. Now, Rebberal Soloveitchik in Yerushalayim said that it's pashit. This is wrong. It's in the Yeshua, and I'll read you what he says. He says, "Baru pashit. The mitzvah sasation mechigas Amalek rak ala am shel Amalek atzmai." It's pashit that the mitzvah mechigas Amalek is only gesagt on the nation of Amalek. There's a specific nation. Hainu ela sheim yotzei chalatzav shel Amalek. The genetic progeny of Amalek. Shalifas. V'hine yeshid tfisu b'shem Maran Agrach Zatzal. He says there are those who were matfis in the name of the Zeder of Chaim. Sha'amad hamitzvah sasation mechigas Amalek. Eini rak al zera Amalek b'vad. It's not gesagt on zera Amalek b'vad. Ala gam al kol oisen harisham shebachal aderis hanlacham keneged Hashem v'amai. It goes on any nation throughout the Deris who fights with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his people. The spiritual Yarshim Amalek, they behave like Amalek. And they were Moisef in the name of Rav Chaim. He says, the Misham Hachi Lekasav Rambam Gav Mitzvah Saseshel Mechias Amalek for Avad Zichram. This is the Yishuv Astira. Why doesn't the Rambam say for Avad Zichram? Because it's impossible to be Avad Zichram. There's always a hater available who could take on this crown of Amalek. The Gam Hayim Shaychas Mitzvah Zu. He says, V'dvarim Elu, and here's the punchline. Asal Amram. They're asr to say, v'asal l'shamram. They're asr to be heard. The bar da mitzvah sashem mechias Amalek udafka al zera Amalek shiyatzim me Amalek b'nei shalifas ben Esav. It's pashut that the mitzvah saseh of mechias Amalek, and to be honest about it, there is no chazal, there's no whisper of a mention in chazal that Amalek could be a transferable title. L'chera Amalek is very much Amalek. There's no reason to assume it's a transferable title. So Rebbe says this is Rav Chaim never said this, and you can't say such a thing like this. That's what Rebbe says. Now he brings a raya, or the people who put this together bring a raya, that there is a Rambam Mer Nevuchim elsewhere. The Rambam has a kash. He says, why is the Torah Meirach in the yichus of Amalek so much? the Psukim, Amarech, exactly who Esav's children are like. What's the point of the Arichos? And the Rambam Meruvuchim writes that the point of the Arichos, of the Yichus, is to tell you who Amalek is. I mean, you should know a little bit about the genealogy of Esav so that you could find these people. You should be able to isolate them and find them. So the Rambam L'chayr Meruvuchim is pretty muforish that the mitzvah of Amalek still exists. It has to do with the specific people. In fact, the Torah gave you some pointers to be able to isolate who exactly Amalek is. Now, there are rayas to the other Messiah of the Soloveitchik family that Rav Chaim might have said this. No one knows if Rav Chaim said it or not. And if you're asking me, it doesn't sound like something he would say. It doesn't sound like a Rav Chaim. But there is some rayas from there's an Even Ezra and there's other Rishonim. Meaning there's an Even Ezra and there's a Mechilta. There's an Even Ezra and Mechilta on the Parsha that seem to say things like this. I'll read the Mechilta. The Mechilta says, Es Amalek, he darshans, the Mechilta darshans, Kemashmoi, Es, Elu Ishtli Ubanav, Amoi, Elu Chayalas She'imoi, the army that's with him. The Mechilta, I don't want to say a little bit in the weeds, but the Mechilta continues, there's the Even Ezra darshans like this. There are drushes that seem to say that anybody who becomes like Amalek, who joins Amalek, who becomes on board with Amalek, gets the treatment and the title of Mechias Amalek also. Now, there is a difference. The Mechilta and the Even Ezra are talking about during the battle of Amalek, meaning Amalek comes, they have a king, they have a nation, and they also hire some mercenaries, or they also make an alliance with another country. So there, the Mechilta is saying there's like a chumrah that the din of Mechias Amalek and the way we battle Amalek gets to include everybody who's part of Amalek, everyone who's joining them. But that someone could become Amalek 1,000 years later, independent of Amalek, that the Mechilta is not really saying. So this is a nidin how to learn the Rambam. Now there is another very simple understanding as to why the Rambam wouldn't say Avad Zichron by Amalek, even though he says it by Zayin Amim. And this is really, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah seems to be saying this, is that it's very simple. If you look in the Psukim and the end of B'Shalach, it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Macha Emcha Zeichar Amalek. Right? Mechamal Hashem Midar Dar, I'm going to destroy them. Now, there's Ein Nister Minaged Einacha. Of course, when Hashem is ready to out Amalek and say, this is Amaleki, this is an Amaleki, this is an Amaleki, it's going to be the easiest thing in the world. Meaning when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is ready, you're right, Klal Yisrael today has no ability to out Amalek and to wage a battle against them because we don't know who Amalek is. But this is a grudge that Hashem bears also. It's not just a mitzvah that Hashem told us to do. It's something Hashem is Mishtatef Pu'ula with. Hashem also wants to get on board and destroy Amalek. So, and the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs really says this lahedya, that when Hashem is ready, when the time is ready, Hashem will tell us who Amalek is. We'll get a printout of genealogy from all over the globe, and you'll go, and you'll deal with everything that needs to be dealt with. Meaning it's not hard to find them if Hashem's helping you find them. So that's really the simplest teretz, the simplest yishuv, and that's really the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah says. Now, I see we're not going to have time to go into today all the different messages of who's Amalekim, and then after minutes Allah will have to say that. I just want to share one thing that's interesting, is that we're maching avek this idea that Amalek could be a transferable title, right? That Amalek could be a transferable title. Amalek has to be the nation of Amalek, and a lot of the messages about who the nation is, and we'll get to them, whether it's Armenians or the English or the Spanish or the Germans or there's like endless messages, and we'll get to some of them later, maybe next week in Mitzvah. It's interesting is that in a lot of Gedolim, and based on Isaiah, you find Gedolim refer to even Jews could be Amalek, which clearly means that there is some sort of transferable title. Meaning maybe not B'mlei Muvan Amila, that there's a din of Mechias Amalek on a Jew, on a fellow Jew, but the concept that someone could become hashkafically an Amaleki, that is widely accepted. I'm not talking only like Agarat, if you look at a Divrei Yoel, the Tziyonim are called Amalek, it's too numerous to count. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about that. But even Rabbi Chanan in Kavitz Mamarim quotes B'Shem the Chavetz Chaim. This is a famous quote. I'll read it for you. It's in Yiddish. He quoted B'Shem the Chavetz Chaim that the Chavetz Chaim used to say, "By mir is barer as zeinen von Zera Amalek." He was talking about the Eskevtzia, which is like the Jewish collaborators who are helping the Soviets enforce, anti-religious ideas. And Rabbi Chanan quotes B'Shem the Chavetz Chaim, "By mir is barer, it's pasha to me that they're Mizera Amalek." And he's talking about people who came from Goldberg, Bernstein, Eisenman, Rabinowitz, regular Yiddish families. They all had regular names before they changed them to be, Russian names. They were all regular from the Misalsa V'Shamna, from the Shens to Best of Mishpachas, throughout what the Soviets were controlling. And the Chavetz Chaim was saying that it's pasha to him that they're Mizera Amalek. And there's many other different svarim and times that Rabbanim use these terms of Mizera Amalek. So clearly, I think that Rav Chaim could have been using Zera Amalek in a similar sense. Meaning, I don't know that this memra from Rav Chaim that turned into like a technical halachic memra, that the din of Mechias Amalek could apply to other nations, even though they're not genetically Mizera Amalek, was ever meant in that context. It's Yitachan that Rav Chaim's quote of someone could be Mizera Amalek meant along this vein of the Zohar, along this vein of the Chavetz Chaim and Rav Chanan, that you could have someone who becomes hashkafically Mizera Amalek, and you have to treat it with Oisei Chaymer, meaning not that you go, I don't think even the Chavetz Chaim was saying they have to kill all the children of a Yiskevtziya member if you can. It means, hashkafically, look at the challenge that they present to be an existential challenge like Amalek was to Klal Yisrael. Okay, now Mitzvah next week we'll continue into particularly the Germans. So I think we'll do a full week on the Germans and the Nafkaminas La'alacha of if they are or aren't Amalek.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.